Hi everyone. I'm here and I'm surrounded in books because I thought I would take a stab at doing a video. I don't know. I've never done such a thing before, so please forgive me. But I thought I would discuss a little bit about Bronwen Wallace, who is a poet that I mentioned in my inaugural "Should I Talk About Poetry?" video. And it's just because I studied her relatively closely. So I thought, why not just start there then? And in reviewing a few things in preparation, I kind of forgot all of the intermarriage of people, because our history in this country is so brief, as I talked about in that earlier video, and I think it's probably, now I don't know, but it's probably because our population is small in Canada. For reference, you could fit our entire population and still come up short into California. Like, this, just the one state of California has more people in it than our entire country has as a population. It's small population, huge country, teeny tiny population. So all of these people are kind of connected, and it's really interesting. And it's especially interesting for me because I happen to have, just by accident, all these things that work together, and I'll get to that in a sec. You'll see what I mean. So this is an interview in an old anthology that I have here that still has all my old flags in it from when I was in school, because I used this one a lot. And the interviewer was asking Bronwen Wallace, kind of where she kind of got started before she was, established, right? And she talks about Al Purdy, The Caribou Horses, and reading that in 1970. And it made me smile to remember that, because I have here a third edition. This is not a first edition of The Caribou Horses, but it's a third. And originally this book was made in 1965, so right at the dawn of the literary kind of poetry scene here. And yeah, Al Purdy is kind of seen as one of the OG founding fathers, if you want, of our kind of culture to do with this stuff. So it's one of these kind of important pieces if you study these things. And I happened to find this copy a long time ago, hidden in the back of an old bookstore, and I had to buy it. I was like, these are impossible to find. Wow. So I have a copy, which I think is rad. Anyway, she says of his work, The Caribou Horses, his work gave me permission to write about the people I knew and the landscape I saw, and, most importantly, in the voice I'd heard in my head all my life, the voice of the men and women in my family. And she goes on to say, I grew up around rural people and working class people who tell stories. Some of that language comes from what I remember of all those conversations and people telling stories. The other big influence is that I've been a feminist since 1969. Some of what happens in my poems is an attempt to capture how women's conversations work, which is never linear, but circles and moves around things. It's, obviously this is a much longer interview, but that's just kind of a taste of where she was coming from and all of that. And what's nice is that voice seems to be, now, of course, my teachers are not here, so I can't just ask them. Otherwise I would. Voice seems to be a massive facet to this, because when you think about the poetry that I think most of us have run into at one point or another in high school or post-secondary, doesn't matter, we learn and read, you know, the old masters, you know, that usually are from the UK or somewhere like that, right? And their voice is different. It's a lot more like, if you go back and you read something like Keats or you know, Wordsworth or somebody like that, the diction is, and when I say diction, I just mean choice of vocabulary. It's much more expansive. It's Latinate, it's ornamental, it's oblique, it's indirect, it's formal. I hope that's making sense, all those words that I'm saying. And I suspect, I don't know, but I suspect the reason for that is because back at one time, poetry was much like philosophy, in that if you had the time to, well, know how to read, for one, if we're going way, way far back, if you could read, you were elite. And therefore, why would we discuss anything to do with real life in literature? That's just beneath us, you know, like there's this sense of hierarchy there. And one thing that I notice, it's true of American poetry too, but I notice it's a very, very important aspect of Canadian literature, is to use, and of course this is not a universal thing, you can't just say everybody does this thing or nobody does this thing, because, you know, that's not the case. But most of the time when you're reading something in, you know, in our canon here, is written in everyday parlance. Sometimes not, but and a lot of times, yes. It's gonna sound like the way people naturally would speak. You're not gonna see a lot of great big highfalutin words in there, unless that's what that poetry is trying to do. It's trying to, you know, it's trying to distill something more complex. But a lot of times it's not. It's just there to illustrate something, and therefore it doesn't need to be elevated with highfalutin language, for lack of a better way of putting it. And what's neat is I happen to have this here. This is a book that Patrick Lane wrote, and I was lucky enough to meet him. I mentioned that in a video, and he knew Bronwen Wallace really well. And this is a fantastic book, Last Water Song. It's actually a bunch of, there is some verse in here, but there are prose poems in here for all of his friends who we had lost just because they're no longer with us, and he was kind of paying tribute. And it's moving because he recently passed away himself. I think it's been about 3 or 4 years now since Patrick Lane passed away. But anyway, he wrote this prose poem as a tribute to Bronwen Wallace. It's simply called For Bronwen Wallace. Your poems are stories with common bones, cadence the guide that turns a people into a map of your heart, a history made from prison stones, everything in the details, letters that asked for grace and caught it with the lifelines you threw out. We sat out on the lawn back of the house in Saskatoon, you with your joint and a beer in the other hand. I used to wonder how you could make sense stoned. I never could. 2 tokes and I'd be under the bed, hiding in a corner like a dust ball, afraid of a broom. My world was cocaine and whiskey. I could ask how I made sense. I don't think I ever did. You just kept on talking about the women you knew, the ones in prison, the ones just dead, the ones who were your friends. All that fragility, the blown glass ornaments that were their lives, you juggling them in the wind, trying hard not to let them fall. I liked your anger and your stubbornness, the way you'd tense your jaw as if you had to worry something in there. Some hard candy heart that wouldn't melt. But all the struggle never gave me you. You kept your tears for poems. Back in the League days, you were always tied up with Mary, Rue, and Carolyn. There wasn't room for a man. I kept my distance, watched your feminist moves, and danced what steps I knew in the suites where men punched each other out or got left in gutters, too drunk to understand your voice, your quiet rage. It was the common plight of men who misplaced love, thinking change could be made with a boyish plea for mercy. You'd seen enough of that. A beer bottle smashed against a wall, a woman beaten by the man who loved her. There's only so much anyone can say or do. This learning to love is hard, and common magic is mostly shared on sidewalks where the furniture gets piled, in safe houses where a woman finds what love there is among her kind before going back to the storm. What I loved most about you was forgiveness and your need to find a common truth in a common touch. And maybe that's it, a touch and nothing more. I wasn't around when the cancer ate your mouth. I hated my thinking it was ironic a poet could die in the place where words were made. How cheap a borrowed pain in the limits a body is. Rooms within rooms, a lawn and a man and a woman talking about Levine and Wayman, Purdy and Acorn, the men you said had given you a place where you could cry the time. Neruda, too, and Lowther. It was the fists of men, the women bruised and broken, the indignities that dogged you. But who was it I knew when I knew you? Facts get mixed up in poems, and fictions are a poet's safest bet to change the world. You were all stories, beginnings, middles, ends, and the means was in the measure you ladled out. You said, we carry our lives in our hands. And we do, an open hand held out to hold another, simple things so fragile, even a breath can break them, a word, a poem, the cadence in a woman's voice, like a rocking chair someone's left. It moves by itself a while, then stops, like a tree fallen in a forest no one hears. And yeah, it's interesting. It made me think about it when I was reading just now. The hard candy. Tense your jaws if you had to worry something in there, some hard candy heart that wouldn't melt, because that's what happened, unfortunately. I learned this story from my teacher, Tim Lilburn. He told me this because I asked him one afternoon, what happened to her? Like, she's not old. She wouldn't be old. Like, why have we not heard anything about her? And he said that she went to the dentist for a checkup, like normal, one day, and they found an anomaly in her mouth. Just a visual exam, there was something wrong. And it was the late 80s, it was 1989 when she died. And yeah, in those days especially, they were very limited in what they could do to help her. And they found out that she had terminal cancer, just like that. And that's how she died. It was terrible. So that's a poem kind of about her and kind of about the scene too. I forgot about the mention of names. Mary, Rue, Carolyn. Yeah. Purdy, Acorn. Those are people I've mentioned already. Milton Acorn is the other one, along with Al Purdy. They were kind of the original league of poets from Canada. So, having said all that stuff, I feel compelled to read something she wrote. Let's see. There's a couple that I really, really like. I don't know if I could pick, but move this out of my way a little bit. Now, what you might have learned or gleaned from that poem I just read is that she was involved in social justice, social causes, and was an ally for other women, and really had a disdain for the inequality that was, even more prevalent at that time than it is today. There's still progress to be made, obviously, but that was her mission, was to kind of put everything out there, and she was a part of that too. She worked in justice, if I'm not mistaken. That was part of her background before she was a full-time academic and poet in residence and things like that. So this one is from her book Common Magic from 1985, and it says, "How it will happen. In this town, it's times like these make a woman realize exactly how her job is going to destroy her. It won't be an accident either. The sudden shearing of metal or rock that gets you in a factory, a mine. Even now, the woman can feel it coming on like one of those slow diseases of the joint or the bone that doctors diagnose in terms you recognize as bigger words for dying. Her job is to sit at a desk all day, talking to people who come at her through a smudged glass door that gets kicked in every week or so by someone who didn't get what they wanted, or someone else who realized suddenly that they never would. After 8 hours, she can go home, which is the problem, which is what makes her think that maybe they're right. The people who say a woman gets too personal in a job like this, a problem of hormones maybe, something in the size of the breasts, the position of the uterus. She envies the younger girls, the way they snap their desk drawers shut at 4:30 sharp, snap open their makeup cases, paint their lips bright red. The laughter comes from a great distance, the way she imagines it must sound to the woman she saw at 3:45, the woman whose husband hit her so hard he broke her middle ear, sending the sounds of her own screams back in a roar of blood. Women and children. In a town like this, where there aren't enough factories to keep them busy, the women take welfare. Their kids take to the streets, surviving on small stuff until something comes along that's big enough to put them in jail for a few years. The woman sees 8 or 10 a day, boys mostly, about her son's age. Usually they stare at the floor while she talks to them, arms folded over their chests, and even when they do look her in the eye, All she can see anymore are the faces they've learned to wear for high school principals, truant officers, youth workers, cops. Reminds her of that game she used to play at the cottage in August when there was nothing left to do, hauling waterlogged wood out of the bay to push it over the edge of the dock, watch it sink again into that thick, dull water. Since this is a prison town, most of the guys you read about on the front pages are here somewhere. So are their wives and kids, like camp followers, waiting for the next move. Lots of times, though, the next move takes so long that by the time the guy gets out, even on a day pass, the families have disappeared. These are the ones the woman feels most sorry for, so she takes them out to a show or invites them home for dinner. At Christmas, it was Tyler, his first day out in 10 years. The woman remembers two things: the hours he spent just sitting in her kitchen, studying the pattern pale sun made, with the plants in the window and the smoke from his cigarettes, and the way he stared at her daughter's breasts when she poured him coffee. At night, when she lies down, a voice drones in her head like one of those tapes you can play by your pillow to help you learn things while you sleep. It's only a job, the voice tells her, only a job. And there's only so much you can do for people like that. They have to learn to help themselves. But each day still heaves itself in, white and graceless. The same faces set themselves against her, and her words stumble in a need that has nothing to do with help at all. In a town like this, it's times like these make a woman see more clearly how it will happen. It isn't a matter of keeping on or quitting. Nothing as clear as that. But the look on her son's face when he says he wants to be a cop or a prison guard, though he's only 14 and you can't tell with boys this age, because he's sick of all this wishy-washy bleeding heart crap, wants to be a cop so he can have things cut and dried. It's watching him say that, knowing he means it, knowing she wants the same thing herself, only differently. And as an interesting other side note, I feel like I have a lot of side notes, the reference to this is a prison town is actually, she's talking about Kingston, Ontario. And Kingston is known for its, I think, probably our largest federal prison is in Kingston. So if you commit murder or something like that, you'll be sent there. And there's also a large military base in Kingston too. So people who are criminals end up there, and people in the military end up in Kingston too, a lot. So that's why there's a lot of movement. That's why there's a lot of interacting between the different groups with the different social problems and all of that. So she was very aware of all this stuff and the difficult spot to be in when you're trying to make a difference in all of that. So that's what I think I have. This has been a long video, I know. But I just thought I would bring some of the books I happen to already have to show us. And just for fun, I don't remember if I showed this in that earlier video, but there's her signature. And I'm lucky to have a copy of this book at all. Like the Caribou Horses, it's a hard one to find. So anyway, do go and look her up and see what else of hers that you like. She wrote a few collections, thankfully, before she passed away. So Anyway, there's a subscribe button right there if you're into it, and there's another video down there that you're welcome to go and watch, or you can pick a different one and go and watch that one instead. I can't make you do anything. It's your life. So if you've enjoyed, excellent, I'm glad. If you have other suggestions about what you might want to see with regards to this, please do drop me a note in the comments, and yeah, let me know how we can fine-tune this a little bit. This was just a shot in the dark attempt, so I'll see you later.